We've come to the end, and oh boy, what an ending. Yes, I know it was only supposed to be a ponytail, but I got in there and then things went out of control. We are halfway to a full Punchline cosplay at this point. But today we're taking a look at Gotham City Sirens number 4, the finale. And without any preamble or burying the lead, this got very messy. There are also some moments that are just baffling. We're gonna forego the going through it point by point, lots of character voices, not all of them, some, I can't resist, but just because there's a lot to discuss. And I don't want this to turn to one of those video essays with a cork board and all those kind of things. Not today. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and this series raises many questions that I think are interesting to ponder and I want to ask. Many of them are never answered, down to basic things like why did it have a Western theme in the first place? The answer is just cuz. Many things in this story just ended up happening, or happened because they needed to make the end plot make sense. We of course have been covering this week by week, so if you missed anything, I'll link all of them down below, and I'll do a really quick sum up. Basically, the Gotham City Sirens found out that Punchline was running this kind of online deadly dangerous game using real people as targets. It was a real world first person shooter. She was using this drink, XO, which was a combination of her old drug compound and something else, and nanite technology she had used before to control people. They went to stop her. That is the extreme cliff notes. Again, I have the links to the full videos down below. Now, before we get into describing what happened in this one, I have to give a disclaimer, because I've gotten some pushback while covering this, you're reading this series wrong, and I wanted to address that sentiment. Basically, the idea is that it's a comedy book and you need to read it like that, for the comedy, for the lulz. And to that I have to say, I'm not talking about whether you find the book funny or not, or about its genre overall. There were parts I found funny, I've laughed while reading this. It also had some interesting ideas brought forth that I personally would love to see revisited. I'm talking about inconsistencies in the story, editing, and the art. And that is inside the mini, not even expanding it to the context of DC overall, because that would be a whole other thing. Being a comedy book doesn't mean that the book can or should have many errors or mistakes inside of it. Which also isn't to say that they don't happen, because of course they do. I make mistakes too.
You don't want to be like this. This is disgusting. This is awful in every way.
But that doesn't mean that they aren't worth mentioning, or that the genre means that they aren't worth mentioning, or that they should be ignored because the overall tone is meant to be humorous. Popcorn or zany fun doesn't equal mistakes or inconsistencies no longer matter or no longer deserve to be discussed. For some, their enjoyment of the whole affair or different aspects will supersede those elements, and so they'll be pushed into the background or won't matter as much. For others, yours truly included, they won't. As I always like to say, mileage varies. I know it's very hard to take all that seriously when I have a ridiculous red clown dot on my nose. The more I look at it, the more normal it looks. Clowncore is real. Now, with all that said, to the Sirens. This issue was written by Leah Williams and has multiple artists, one being Daniel Hilliard from issue 2. But about halfway through the issue, that switches to Brandon Stein. Now, Hilliard already had a different style than Matteo Lolli, who did issue 1 and then came back for issue 3. Brandon Stein also have a very different style, and it's not only different, but highly stylized. Which in and of itself is not a bad thing. There are some sequences where it really shines. Some of the action beats at the end take on a kind of Looney Tunes-esque quality that's fun. There's also a very trippy drug sequence where it works very well, where Catwoman and White Rabbit are tripping out after they're dosed. However, at the same time, it is a jarring shift that will take some out of it while others won't necessarily mind. But either way, it is something noticeable. This issue does open up directly where the last left off, with the Sirens plus White Rabbit and Dumb Bunny getting ready to fight with the zombies Punchline unleashed at the end of issue 3, which is not really an issue because Pam quickly raises them above them with her plant control powers. There are some noticeable art differences in between how Lolli drew Dumb Bunny and how Hilliard draws Dumb Bunny, and then later on how Brandon Stein are going to draw Dumb Bunny. At the start here, you see that Hilliard really focuses on the legs, whereas Lolli really focused on the arms. It makes it feel as if there was an internal consistency in terms of how the character was meant to be drawn, or that it wasn't clearly conveyed across the different artists. There has been some speculation that this was meant to be a longer series that was cut down, or that it was super rushed. Who knows what happened behind the scenes? All we have to look at is the finished product. If that did happen, that is never fun. Ivy says they need to figure out what the exo compound is composed of to free the people and save the day, which makes sense for this issue, but also renders some of what occurred in issue 1 a bit redundant or not explored enough. Remember in issue number 1, Poison Ivy was examining the exo punch drink, and it was never explained why. This issue will not connect to that scene with this one, even though it will be revealed that the special ingredient in Alexis's mind control is Pam's own pheromone, a synthetic version. This means that in issue 1, Pam didn't recognize a version of her own pheromone, which is a bit of a suspending moment. You could make it work, but it is the kind of thing that would be best explained. Because these two things weren't connected, it also means that Pam missed out on strong motivation she could have had from the start to be going after Punchline. if in issue 1 she was able to identify that this was some kind of synthetic version of her hormones, she has an instant reason to want to go and be involved in this conflict. And nothing about that needs to take away from any of the humor beats. Humor doesn't mean no stakes or no continuity. Since there's no reason given as to why she didn't recognize this, it comes across as she just didn't because it needed to be something that occurred for the plot in this issue. It could be inferred as though not enough time was there for her to examine it. But the idea that she was looking into it or referring back to, I thought someone was familiar with it, that connection is not utilized. Now this reveal does lead to some of the best moments in the book between Punchline and Poison Ivy. You dare synthesize me for your profit? I'm a businesswoman! Some of Punchline's lines here are really hit or miss. The ones that are more in line with her character overall and the persona they've given her here land. Others are just a bit more generic and applied to her. It ranges. This exchange is near to the end. Before that, the group splits into teams. Dumb Bunny, Poison Ivy, and Harley outside the compound, and White Rabbit and Catwoman sneaking in to see what they can learn about stopping the control, which is where they learn that the secret ingredient is Poison Ivy's pheromone, a synthetic addition, this after they're dosed. The Ivy, Harley, and Dumb Bunny section is largely a fight between Punchline and them. And it's a lot of jokes, which makes sense. This book has established itself as a humor first outing. The jokes are of course going to range. If one vibes with Williams' humor, a lot of this will probably be really funny. And perhaps, as I stated at the beginning, that may overcome some of the inconsistencies. But again, as also stated, that does not remove them. A lot of the humor here comes from the derogatory usage of words, and it appears that why they established the positive usage of them was so that they could use them contradictorily, derogatorily, and that there would be some kind of contrast. Again, mileage varies. It's meant to be a counterbalance, but also that means that some of the words are bleeped out, which leaves them to be filled in by the reader, and they're gonna fill in completely different words, and that's gonna lead to different interpretations of what the character said and hence what it means down the line, which could or could not eventually cause problems. It remains to be seen. Pull me up, whore. Only if you call me that again, but as a compliment this time, not an insult. Crazy. The Exopunch secret ingredient, it's me. That's how Punchline is controlling people, by using a synthetic version of my pheromone hormone. That whore! Derogatory. You dumb, insert slur here. I assumed it was see you next Tuesday. You killed all my investors. I'm not dumb. I dumb bunny. The investors all get killed after Poison Ivy transforms into like a giant version of herself covered in plant material, so almost like a plant type mech. That's pretty cool. And then they all get smashed cartoonishly. Both of these sequences work. You get some standard I'm alive but not comedy, and you get to see the green Ivy. Punchline gets thoroughly roughed up this issue, which makes sense. This is the end. She is the villain. This is her comeuppance moment. Unfortunately, none of the previous pathos between her and any character is utilized for the banter. It's particularly jarring, and some of the ways that she's spoken about just feel very generic. It's particularly noticeable with Harley, because not only have they fought before more than once, but even if one didn't know that, there's the Joker connection. I'm Harley, by the way. I know who you are, insert word here that they say is a slur, even though it would also make sense if it wasn't. The whole exchange just reads as odd to me personally, but let me know what you think. Overall, throughout this series, with some exceptions, a lot of times it feels like the lines between characters could be interchanged. They don't feel as though they have their own distinct voices for most of it. And at other moments, it just feels like a bunch of vaguely connected, jokey vignettes. My investors are dead because of you. I worked so hard to secure that capital. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to find billionaires who are morally bankrupt? This line does not work with Punchline's past characterization, because a lot of her characterization is built around the fact that she is aware of how morally corrupt people are and uses that to her advantage. She even did that in this series. However, it's here so that they can throw in a no such thing as an ethical billionaire joke. So ultimately how this shakes up is, White Rabbit had the trait of caring about animals in this series. It's part of what helped her break the nanite control, which it still isn't firmly explained how she was able to do, but she did. So after they discover the secrets in the lab, her and Catwoman, she breaks off to free the animals. This is one of the stronger sections because the animals have been established from issue 1. Although in that issue, the bison were partially robotic, but now the animals, or at least these animals, are described as if they are 100% real, but can still heal because of the nanites. It's not clear if there were two types or if something changed in between the issues. Ivy is able, because it's a version of her pheromone, to break the control over the NPCs, as they are called, which is nice usage of the term because of the gaming vernacular and everything in play, even though that element has very much just been dropped and fallen by the wayside. She's also seemingly able to do this for every single person, whether they're there or not. It's a you gotta go with it type moment, and some will be able to and others won't. Especially as in issue 2, there was a panel where it was said she couldn't use her pheromone powers on those under the Exo thrall. all, because something was blocking them. Ivy also says to the animals that they're indestructible still. Does that mean that the nanite-controlled people are still indestructible? As someone pointed out in the last vid, Punchline is giving some serious Star Trek Into Darkness energy because she essentially invented immortality and then just decided to stay a villainous streamer. Because every animal is free, there is a stampede, and Punchline, who is being held by Dumb Bunny and had called the Nasty Boys to her aid, is caught up in the stampede. And they play it. Did she get crushed or mauled? Of course she'll be fine for later. They will use her later, most likely. I hope. It's in the end segments where one feels the most this was cut down energy. If the stampede hadn't destroyed the facility, I'd say we should go back in and figure out how Punchline was able to synthesize my pheromone hormone in the first place. I hope it was really thoroughly destroyed, because if there's any trace, somebody else could do this. There's also the matter of the player as a trigger warning. Some could be innocent and ignorant of Punchline's scheme, but many of them most certainly knew they were controlling enslaved human avatars. How do you know that? So when we get back to Gotham, I'm gonna poke around the trigger warning servers and find the identities of everyone involved. This whole exchange has strong wrap it up energy. Also, remember when Catwoman said she was going to investigate the robot Bison in both issues 1 and 2, and then just didn't? We're at the very end, and it's time to discuss something that I've left aside purposefully for now because there's so much to say about it. White Rabbit. Since issue 3, but starting at issue 2, there has been some confusion about White Rabbit and how she's been utilized. Also, just in general about the fact that her powers haven't been fully explained and many people aren't aware of who she is. Last issue 3, Dumb Bunny appeared. Some were wondering if this was an Inferior 5 reference. It does not appear to be, and instead seems to be something more akin to a bunny from Powerpuff Girls reference, as someone mentioned in the comments.
You're our sister too!
Sister!
Issue 3 raised some questions for me. Namely, which of these two bunnies was Jaina? Because at the end of issue 2, Jaina was seen in the cell with the Sirens at Punchline's compound. Now, based on the context cues, I inferred that Jaina was Small White Rabbit. However, someone pointed out another potential angle that I had dismissed, which was that perhaps the Jaina sitting in the cell was an art error, that maybe she wasn't supposed to be there, because there was dialogue in the scenes previous about how she was going to stay in the city and investigate the whole game. Now, I assumed that Jaina had been captured at some point, since at the beginning of issue 1, we saw her nearly get captured by the Nasty Boys and she had to split off. And so, I further assumed that the answer would be coming in issue 4. Well, you know what they say about assuming. So we're here, issue 4, what's the answer? Art error, or was one of them Jaina? And the answer is, I'm not sure and I can't tell. White Rabbit's powers were not functioning as they had in the past of DC, which we've been leaving pretty much alone since White Rabbit is largely undefined in that regard. So this could have been a chance to solidify what was going on with her and what she could do. The thing is, in this series, it's largely defined as the series goes on, so it's not always clear. In this series, she's able to speak through her clone, like actually take control of her, whereas in the past they've been two separate individuals. So she was able to speak through Dumb Bunny and also feel her pain. But that is really neither here nor there. It's happening so the information can be conveyed across locations. But it's not inconceivable or a bad idea. To be able to feel each other adds an interesting element. And because of all this, some people had postulated at the end of issue 3 that Dumb Bunny was a third bunny, that Jaina was at the city, White Rabbit was at the compound, who then further split off into Dumb Bunny. In issue 4, White Rabbit says, "It's where Punchline dosed me with XO. I'm sure we can find something useful in there." So this statement seemed to imply that Dumb Bunny was indeed a third character, because we saw the split off version of White Rabbit get dosed in issue 2, and that made it lean towards art error. But you may be asking, what's confusing about that? 3 bunnies, art error, but then 3 panels at the very end happen. Hi, Dumb Bunny.
I Dumb Bunny.
You sure are. Let's go home. This appears to be White Rabbit and Dumb Bunny recombining into Jaina. This is the confusing element. We have the panels. We don't see Jaina pulling up from Gotham or anything. We see this recombination into Jaina. This ending doesn't match what was presented with the rest of the story. Jaina, White Rabbit, and Dumb Bunny were key characters. Where they were and what they were doing and how they got there was important to the overall comprehension. Even in a madcap adventure, the details still matter. So was Jaina an art error? This makes it appear so, since they recombined into her. White Rabbit says when they injected me, and the White Rabbit we saw get injected was the one that split off from Jaina. So then, was Jaina Dumb Bunny? If so, when and how did she get captured? Did White Rabbit make her Hulk out in Gotham and then she came to them since it was shown in this issue they could influence each other? Or was it not an art error and Jaina was in the cell? Art error seems the most likely based on everything around it, but at the same time there's no connection between Jaina and Dumb Bunny made, so she feels like a third bunny. And there are ways to think about it where she could be. Especially because all of a sudden White Rabbit and Dumb Bunny look very similar, whereas Jaina and White Rabbit look quite different. So while I'm leaning towards it, I can't be 100% on it being an art error. It's the kind of thing where for the ending to work, one just has to ignore all the inconsistencies. And for me, the explanation of, oh, it's a comedy, it doesn't matter, doesn't work. It does still matter. Comedies, even the most farcical, have structure. Some say they think things will be changed for the trade. We shall see. Time of recording. That's not out yet. If there were canceled issues or plots or something that was meant to be here that isn't, we the reader don't know. As mentioned, all we have is the finished product, which if anything was missing or canceled, and that was the case, what's left wasn't able to connect the threads that were left over very well. Maybe there wasn't time, or maybe it was just too radically different, or maybe it was always meant to be this way. I don't know. Aside from that, there's also the issues with characterization for the characters, which feels as though it fluctuated quite a bit in the last issue, especially around Harley and Punchline, where it felt like they were trying to make Punchline worse than they had previously, or it just felt like Harley and her were just meeting for the first time. Even though that may have been meant to be a joke, everything felt more caricature-ish, though that may have been facilitated by the art style, which does give a cartoonish vibe by the end, which as mentioned sometimes really works and sometimes doesn't. It looks great when Punchline suddenly pulls out a bazooka out of nowhere. So that was Gotham City Sirens. I'm discombobulated. The only thing that saved me was this red clown nose. This series started off well. It had an interesting premise and one that situated its villain in a very interesting position. It for the most part managed to be topical without feeling cringe or overly outdated. Parts were funny. Some of the jokes were well constructed, others less so. It varied. However, it really fell apart at the halfway mark, from 3 onward, and this last issue was all over the place. Because of this, overall, this isn't the strongest outing for the Sirens. The pacing was incredibly rushed by the end, whether reading individually or all at once, and it raised many questions it never answered, and I only brought up a few of them. And as mentioned, answering questions or providing some explanation need not cut into the jokes. I know I keep saying that, but like I said, I was thrown by the whole ignore it, just read it as a comedy. I was reading it as a comedy. I still had questions. And issue 3 was proof of the fact that you could have explanations and jokes. It started with a massive info dump that had jokes built in. Overall, Punchline had the strongest moments in the series, although she too fell into disarray by the end. Pam got some good moments at the end too. Dumb Bunny, for her brief existence, also had a couple of moments. It's just overall, it didn't quite come together. All of the aforementioned we've discussed was based on what was there as presented, looking at the story as it was. Even changing nothing of the plot or outcome, it could have been more coherently structured. Perhaps someday someone will come back and revisit some of these threads, because trigger warning, the Punchline streamer era, the manipulation of the elite subs, there's something there that could be worked with either again in a comedic setting or in a darker setting. There were some cool ideas here that bear re-exploration. At the end of the day, for me, it was a lot of fun following this series because I was doing it with all of you. It did have some funny moments. I think it showed some more of Punchline's potential, but overall it just didn't come together. And I also got this sweet wig that I'll love forever or until something happens to it. I hope you all had fun as well, whether you were along for the journey or maybe you found a book that you loved. There's much more that could be discussed, but we've gone on long enough. Those were all my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. This series, what do you think of it? Everything happening. I want to hear it. Do you think this was a good showing of the Sirens? Let's chat. Put your thoughts down there. While you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your day to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye. Fight Club reference shirt. I don't know why. It just seemed like the vibe. Bye-bye.